Mara's hands went cold the second her eyes landed on that contract. The fancy crystal glasses on her tray caught the warm golden light from the wall lamps. Little flashes of gold danced across the shiny dark wood table. She should have just put the glasses down, kept her head low, and walked back through those kitchen doors like she always did. 3 months, 3 whole months of working in Dante's private dining room. And in all that time, she had gotten really, really good at being invisible. There but not noticed, present but forgotten, like a piece of furniture that nobody looks at twice. But that one clause stopped her cold. Section 4, subsection B. Her breath got shorter. The words on the page blurred, then sharpened again, like a knife slowly coming into focus, right in front of her face. Eminent domain facilitation. She knew those words. She didn't just recognize them. She felt them, deep in her bones. The way you feel something that once broke you completely. Those exact words had destroyed her father. Stripped him of his property, his business, his reason to keep going. No, this couldn't be happening again. Not here, not now. Dante reached for the pen. His fingers, long and controlled, moved toward the signature line. The man sitting next to him, some associate she'd never seen before, smiled like the whole thing was already done and sealed. Mara's pulse started hammering in her throat. Stay silent, pour the water, walk away. But then she saw her father's face behind her eyes. That hollow, empty look he carried in those final months. The way he had whispered to her, his voice barely there. They hid it in the fine print, baby. By the time I understood what I had signed, everything was already gone. The pen touched the paper. Excuse me, sir. Her voice cut right through the low hum of conversation in that room. But that clause is a trap. The room went completely still. Dante's hand froze mid-stroke, his head turned slowly. Those dark, unreadable eyes found her across the table. The easy, casual authority in his face shifted, hardened into something cold, something deadly. 6 feet of controlled power in a charcoal suit. The kind of man who had built an empire by knowing instantly when someone was lying to him. His voice, when it finally came, was quieter than she had ever heard it. Quieter, and somehow 1,000 times more dangerous. What did you just say? What secret was this waitress hiding behind her neat uniform and careful silence? Why did she know legal language complicated enough to fool Dante's own team of lawyers? And what would the most dangerous man in the city do now that she had said words that could unravel absolutely everything? The answers to those questions were about to shatter the walls she had spent years carefully building between her past and her present. The truth was about to expose a conspiracy that reached all the way into the highest levels of city government. But first, Mara had to survive the next 60 seconds. 3 months earlier, Mara had stood at the entrance of Dante's club with $47 in her wallet and a lie folded up tight in her pocket. The building rose up in front of her, dark glass and brushed steel, the kind of place where power gathered itself into a single address, where fortunes changed hands over dinner, where the men inside shaped the city from behind closed doors, while everyone else outside pretended not to notice. She held her fake resume tight. Every single line on it had been carefully put together to show only the acceptable version of her life. Waitress at a fancy downtown hotel, night shifts at a diner, hostess for a corporate catering company. Everything else, everything that actually mattered, had been surgically cut out. The manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Hannah, studied her with the look of someone who had seen hundreds of desperate women walk through that door and knew exactly what to look for in each one. You understand what discretion means here. Yes, ma'am. What you see in this building stays in this building. What you hear stays here too. No questions, no curiosity, no conversations outside these walls. Hannah's eyes didn't move from her face. Dante values invisibility in his staff. Your past, your story, who you are outside, none of that exists here. You exist only when you're needed. Can you do that? Mara met her eyes with the quiet calm of someone who had already died once on the inside and was just moving through the days that came after. I need this job. I won't cause any problems. And she hadn't, not once. For 3 straight months, Mara had been the perfect ghost. She arrived every morning at 5:30. She prepared the private rooms before anyone else arrived. She served lunch meetings where men talked about territory, disputes using careful, polite language that meant something completely different underneath. She cleaned up after dinners where deals got sealed with handshakes that meant far more than any signature ever could. She ate her staff meal alone in the back kitchen. She changed in the narrow little staff room. She left through the service door at 4 every afternoon. Never lingering, never looking back. She never paused when Dante held court in the main lounge. His presence pulled the whole room toward him like gravity. Men twice his age deferred to him with barely hidden fear in their eyes. She never reacted when conversations drifted through open doors. Talks about property deals that skirted the edge of the law, about city officials who owed favors, about competitors who had made fatal mistakes in judgment. She had built a wall between who she was now and who she used to be. Between Mara the waitress and Mara, former real estate litigation specialist at one of the city's most aggressive law firms, where she had been brilliant, before she had been completely destroyed. The wall had felt solid, permanent, necessary, the only thing keeping her together, but walls only hold until something strikes them hard enough. And Section 4, subsection B, struck like a wrecking ball, because those words, that specific, carefully crafted legal language, were identical to the trap that had killed her father. Not metaphorically killed, actually killed, slowly, legally, with documents instead of bullets, the clause that had stripped him of his commercial property. His life's work, his reason to keep breathing. She couldn't watch it happen again, not even to protect herself. Not even standing right in front of Dante. A man who could make her disappear with a single phone call. The moment she spoke, his associate went completely quiet. Every conversation in the room died. Dante set the pen down with slow, deliberate care. He rose from his chair, crossed the room in 3 measured steps, unhurried, controlled, like a predator who already knew he had all the time in the world. He stopped close enough that she could smell him, cedar and smoke, close enough that the heat radiating off his body made her skin prickle with something she didn't want to name. You recognize something in my contract, not a question, a statement. Explain, now. Every survival instinct in her body screamed at her to lie, to backtrack, to drop the tray and run for the exit and never look back. But another part of her, the part that had spent 2 years in hiding, the part that still woke up dreaming about her father's funeral, the part that was so exhausted and so tired of being nobody, that part simply refused to break. Section 4, subsection B, she said. She forced her voice to stay steady even as her hands shook on the tray. The eminent domain facilitation clause. It looks like standard protective language for city compliance, but it's not. She made herself look directly at him. Those black, unreadable eyes that had ordered terrible things without flinching. The trigger language is asymmetric. The phrasing, may be subject to verses shall be considered, means the city can start eminent domain proceedings against your property after you buy it, but you can't challenge how they calculate what it's worth. They'll say they're offering fair market value, but the appraisal method is laid out in subsection C, and it's designed to fail. She kept going. 40% reduction for community benefit offset. You buy this land for $20 million, pour another 10 into building it up, and then they seize it for $12 million. You lose everything you invested, and they profit from every single improvement you made. The silence that followed felt like drowning. Dante stared at her, not through her, not past her, but directly at her, like he was truly seeing her for the very first time. His jaw tightened. Something shifted behind his eyes. Dangerous, curious, impossibly focused. Who are you? Each word fell like a stone dropping into still water. Mara's hands shook. The truth clawed at her throat, wanting out. Someone who has seen this exact clause before. She whispered. Someone whose father was destroyed by it. Someone who watched him die knowing he had been cheated by legal language he trusted. She swallowed hard against the grief rising fast in her chest. My name is Mara. I was a real estate litigation specialist, and the man who designed this trap, Councilman Richard Cole, is the same man who killed my father. Dante's expression didn't change, but the air between them shifted, thickened, full of danger and possibility. He gestured to one of his associates with a small movement of his hand. The man stood immediately and left the room, pulling the door shut with a soft click behind him. "Sit," Dante said. Mara didn't move. "I should go. I shouldn't have said anything. Sit. Not a request this time." Her legs obeyed before her mind could argue. She set down the tray and lowered herself into one of the leather chairs. The same chairs where she had watched powerful men negotiate their entire futures, where fortunes had been won and lost over cigars and whiskey. Now she sat there in her server's uniform, her hair pulled back in a practical bun, facing a man who could tear apart the fragile little life she had rebuilt with a single word. Dante moved around the table and pulled a chair close to her, not across from her in the position of authority. Close, right beside her, close enough that she couldn't escape if she tried. "Read it," he said, pushing the contract toward her. "All of it, every trap you see. Dante, you're going to tell me your real name," he interrupted, his gaze never leaving her face. "Your real story, and exactly why you know this language. But first, you're going to take apart every clause in this contract. Because if you're right about Section 4, and I believe you are, then there's a reason you recognized it, and I'm going to know what that reason is." Mara's hands trembled as she pulled the document closer. But the moment her eyes landed on the legal language, something shifted inside her. The scared waitress stepped back. The lawyer she had buried fought her way back to the surface. Sharp, hungry. This was muscle memory. This was who she had been before survival had forced her to forget. Section 2. She began, her voice steadying with every word that came out. "The payment schedule, installment basis conditional upon municipal approval. It creates a termination trigger. If approval is delayed beyond 90 days, which Section 4 guarantees it will be, the seller can void the whole contract and keep your deposit. You lose $2 million before you ever own the land." She looked up, found Dante watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Keep going," he said softly. And for the first time in 2 years, Mara stopped hiding who she was. The associates filed out of the room like shadows melting at dawn. Only the weight of what had just been said stayed behind, hanging in the air. Mara sat frozen in the leather chair. Her server's uniform suddenly felt like a costume she had outgrown halfway through a performance she never wanted to be in. Dante moved with the quiet precision of a predator who had just reassessed everything he thought he knew. He pulled his chair closer, close enough that the heat coming off his body made her skin prickle, close enough that she could measure the exact moment his scent, cedar, and something darker, something more dangerous, invaded her senses and made it hard to think clearly. "Start from the beginning," he said. His voice dropped to that lethal whisper that seemed to bypass her ears and sink directly into her chest. "Every word, every clause, every trap you see." Her hands shook as she pulled the contract closer, but the moment her eyes focused on the legal language, something clicked into place. The scared waitress disappeared. The litigator she had buried clawed her way back to the surface, sharp and hungry and ready. "Section 2, she said, her voice steadying with each word she spoke. "The payment schedule, installment basis conditional upon municipal approval. It creates a termination trigger dressed up to look like standard procedure. If approval delays beyond 90 days, which the eminent domain clause in Section 4 guarantees it absolutely will, the seller voids the contract and keeps your deposit. $2 million gone before you ever own a single inch of that land." She felt his gaze on her face like a physical touch. Intense, unblinking. Section 7, the development timeline. Substantial completion within 18 months or you forfeit improvement costs. But the language in Section 4 makes sure permit delays make that timeline completely impossible. You build, you improve, you invest everything you have, and then you lose it all when they seize it for pen is on every dollar you spent. How do you know this pattern? His question cut through her analysis like a blade through silk. Mara's throat tightened. The memory rose up fast. Her father's hollow eyes, the hospital room that smelled of antiseptic, and the particular kind of sadness that comes before the end. The way he had whispered her name one last time before the monitors went flat, because I watched my father die from it, the words scraped out of her, raw and bleeding. He was a small business owner, proud man. He built his commercial property from nothing. A warehouse he turned into artist studios. Over 20 years of his life poured into those walls. She forced herself to hold Dante's gaze. Even as her vision blurred with tears, she wasn't going to let fall. Councilman Richard Cole approached him with a development opportunity, a partnership that would bring the neighborhood back to life and triple his property value. The contract was 200 pages of legal language that my father trusted because the city's name was on it, because Cole showed up with architects and planners and a vision that made my father believe he was finally going to secure our future. Her voice cracked. Dante didn't move, didn't speak, just kept watching her with that impossible, unwavering focus. He signed. 3 months later, the city invoked eminent domain through that exact clause. Section 4, subsection B. They offered him 40% of fair market value, community benefit offset. They called it, he tried to fight it, hired a lawyer with money he didn't have, but the language was airtight, legal, designed to look protective while being pure poison. She dragged in a shaking breath. He lost everything, the property, his savings, his reputation. His heart gave out 6 months later in a county hospital because we couldn't afford the private care he needed. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack. She looked straight at him. I knew better. They had killed him with documents instead of bullets. The silence that followed felt like drowning in deep water. Then Dante reached across the table and did something that shattered every single assumption she had built about him. He placed his hand over hers where it lay trembling on the table, not grabbing, not restraining, just covering her shaking fingers with the warm, solid weight of his palm. The touch was shockingly gentle, from a man who had ordered terrible things without flinching. His voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced now by something cold and focused, not sympathy, something far more dangerous than that, shared fury. "The man behind your contract," he said quietly. "Cole. His son runs a boutique legal firm that specializes in exactly these kinds of municipal development contracts. They're the architects. Cole provides the political cover. Together they've pushed out dozens of small property owners across the city over the past 5 years. His jaw tightened. A muscle flexed beneath his skin. He released her hand and pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. Typed rapidly with controlled, barely contained aggression. "I need everything on Councilman Richard Cole and his son," he said when the call connected. His voice returned to that commander's register, property transfers, contract drafts, municipal filings, everything, and find out who's backing their land acquisitions. He ended the call. Turned back to Mara, those dark eyes burning with something that made her forget to breathe. "I need to know who you really are," he said quietly. "Your real name, your real credentials, everything you've been hiding." Mara's pulse hammered. This was the cliff edge. The moment where she either fell or flew. "Mara," she whispered. "Former real estate litigation specialist. I graduated top of my class at law school. I specialized in complex property disputes and city code violations. I was good, very good, until my father's case took everything from me." She kept going. She had started this. She was going to finish it. "The firm I worked for had partnered with Cole's developers on several projects. When I tried to use the firm's internal resources to investigate what happened to my father, they fired me for conflict of interest, threatened to report me to the bar for misuse of client resources." A short, bitter laugh escaped her. "They blacklisted me. No firm in the city would touch me. I couldn't practice law, couldn't get a reference. My name became toxic. So I erased Mara the lawyer and became Mara the waitress. Someone invisible, someone safe." Dante stood abruptly. The motion was controlled but charged with barely restrained energy. He moved to the window overlooking the city, his city, and stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. "You saved me tonight," he said. He didn't turn around. "Not just from a bad deal, from destruction. That contract would have buried me exactly the same way it buried your father. Do you understand what that means?" Mara shook her head, even though he couldn't see her. He turned then, and the look on his face stole the air completely out of her lungs. It wasn't gratitude. It was something far more dangerous than gratitude. Recognition, the acknowledgement of an equal. "It means I owe you everything," he said softly, "and it means you're going to help me destroy the men who killed your father." Before she could respond, the door opened. A tall, lean man with sharp features walked in carrying a tablet. His eyes swept over Mara with a quick, cool assessment before settling on Dante. "Confirmed, boss." His voice was clipped and efficient. "The firm that drafted your contract is Cole and Associates LLC, owned and operated by the son Adam Cole. Municipal contracts are their specialty." He paused. "And there's more. The silent partner funding their acquisitions is Russo." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Russo, even Mara knew that name, Dante's rival, the man who had been trying to muscle into his territory for years. Dante's face transformed into something terrifying and beautiful simultaneously, cold fury barely held beneath perfect, polished control. When he looked at Mara again, his eyes burned with dark promise. "They made this personal," he said quietly. "Now we make them pay." The rain started as Dante's car wound through the city's late-night streets. Drops streaked down the tinted windows like tears the city was too hard to cry. Mara sat in the back seat, painfully aware of Dante beside her. Close enough that every breath pulled in his scent. Close enough that the warmth between them felt like its own living thing. His driver handled the car in focused silence while another guard sat up front. The weight of everything she had confessed, everything she had agreed to, settled over Mara like a second skin. "Where are we going?" Her own voice sounded foreign to her, steadier than she expected, touched with something that might have been anticipation instead of fear. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied. "Somewhere Cole's people won't find you. You broke your cover tonight. They'll know by morning that the invisible waitress is actually the daughter of the man Cole destroyed. They'll come for you." The casual certainty in his voice made her chest tighten. The car pulled into an underground garage beneath a building that radiated wealth and power. Dark glass and steel reaching up toward the storm-heavy sky. They rode a private elevator in loaded silence. And when the doors opened, Mara stepped into a penthouse that completely redefined what luxury even meant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Rain patterns shifted in the amber lighting. Dark leather furniture anchored the space. But it was the walls that captured her attention, covered in original artwork, each piece carefully chosen. Each one telling a story about taste and control. "Sit," Dante said, gesturing to the sofa. Not a command this time, an invitation. She sank into leather that probably cost more than 3 months of her old salary, feeling completely out of place in her server's uniform. Dante moved to a side table and poured 2 glasses of something amber and expensive. He came back and handed her one before settling beside her. "Close again, always close. Drink." The whiskey burned beautifully, warm paths down her throat and into her chest. She took another sip and let it steady her. "Tell me what you want," Dante said. His voice dropped to that intimate register that made her skin prickle. "Revenge, justice, money." Mara turned to him, really looked at him for the first time without the barrier of her invisible waitress mask between them. He was beautiful in a dangerous way. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that missed absolutely nothing, lips that suggested both cruelty and devastating skill. Power radiated from him like heat from a furnace. "My father's name cleared," she said quietly. Public acknowledgement that he was cheated, not incompetent, that he didn't fail. He was destroyed by design, and I want Cole to lose everything the same way my father lost everything. Something flickered in Dante's eyes, respect mixed with dark satisfaction. "Then we're aligned," he said. "But you need to understand something. Cole has immunity. Municipal shield laws protect councilmen from most civil prosecution. Taking him down requires more than evidence. It requires strategy, resources, and a willingness to operate in spaces where the law is more of a suggestion than a hard boundary." He leaned closer. Mara's breath caught. It requires me. He finished softly. My resources, my connections, my methods. Are you prepared for what that means? I watched my father die while Cole walked free. Mara said. Her voice was steady despite the way her pulse was hammering. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. Dante's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Something darker and more honest. My man Marco will be assigned to you as your security and resource coordinator. Whatever you need, documents, access, legal research, physical protection, he handles it. You'll have full access to my legal team, my investigators, and my entire network. Your only job is to find the angle that destroys Cole legally while I handle everything else. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her bun behind her ear. The gesture was shockingly intimate. His fingers lingered against her cheek for half a heartbeat. But you're not just getting my resources, Mara. You're getting my protection. Anyone who comes for you comes through me first. Understand? The intensity in his gaze made her mouth go dry. This wasn't just a business arrangement anymore. This was something else entirely. Something that felt like possession wrapped in silk and danger. Why? The question escaped before she could catch it. Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know? Dante's jaw tightened. He stood abruptly and moved to the windows. Rain streaking the glass framed him like a portrait of controlled, barely contained violence. Because I know what it's like to be used as a weapon against innocent people, he said quietly. 5 years ago, I helped push through a land acquisition. I didn't ask enough questions. I didn't look past the money and the strategic advantage. A community center was destroyed to make room for luxury condos that were never even built. 30 families lost their gathering place, their sanctuary. He turned. And for the first time, Mara saw something raw and completely unguarded in his expression. I can't undo what I did, but the community center I was trying to build now, the one Cole tried to steal with that contract, that's my attempt to make it right. My attempt to build something that gives back instead of taking. He looked straight at her. Your father wasn't a criminal, Mara. He was collateral damage in someone else's greed, and that's the same sin I committed. So when I say I owe you everything for stopping me from making that mistake again, I mean it, in my bones. The confession hung between them like a bridge across an impossible distance. Mara stood slowly, her legs unsteady. She crossed to him and stopped close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to see the gold flecks move in his dark eyes. Then we both need this, she whispered. You need redemption. I need justice. Maybe those are the same thing. Dante's hand came up. His fingers grazed her jaw with a gentleness that shocked her. The touch sent electricity racing all the way down her spine. Maybe they are, he agreed softly, the moment stretched. Heavy with possibility and danger. Then Marco's voice cut through from the elevator entrance. Boss, the security team swept the lady's apartment. It's clean, but we found this. He held out a worn leather binder, corners bent from years of being handled. Mara's breath stopped. My father's evidence binder. Her voice broke. I thought it was lost when I had to move. She took it with trembling hands, the familiar weight of it both comforting and agonizing at the same time. Her father had documented everything with his own careful hand. Contracts, correspondence, photographs of the property in various stages of development, appraisal documents showing the manipulation laid out step by step. Dante moved beside her and looked over her shoulder as she opened it. His breath stirred the loose strands of her hair. This is ammunition, he said quietly. This proves intent, pattern, premeditation. It's everything, Amara whispered. But it wasn't enough before. Before, you didn't have me, Dante said, his voice dark with promise. Before, you were alone. Now you have an army. He gestured to Marco. Set up the secure room. Everything from that binder gets digitized, analyzed, and cross-referenced with every Cole property deal in the last decade. I want a pattern we can prosecute. As Marco left, Dante turned back to Mara. The vulnerability he had shown moments ago was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a man preparing for war. You're not going back to your apartment tonight. You'll stay here. The guest room is secure and private. In the morning, we begin. Begin what? His smile was sharp and beautiful and terrifying. Destroying everyone who killed your father. The secure room in Dante's building smelled of expensive technology and old leather, a contrast that somehow perfectly embodied the man himself, cutting-edge ruthlessness wrapped in traditional power. Mara sat in front of 3 monitors, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the muscle memory of her lawyer years. Marco coordinated the flow of information nearby with quiet efficiency. 72 hours had passed since the night of the contract. 72 hours of barely sleeping, surviving on coffee, fueled by the burning need to finally see justice done. Her father's evidence binder lay open beside her, its pages marked with sticky notes in her own handwriting from years ago. Notes she had made before the world crushed her ability to keep fighting. Dante came in without knocking. He carried 2 containers of Thai food that smelled absolutely incredible. He set one in front of her with a look that left absolutely no room for argument. "Eat, I'm close to something," Amara protested, but her stomach immediately betrayed her with a loud growl. "You're no good to me if you collapse," he said, settling into the chair right beside her, close again. Always close. Their legs touched, and even through her jeans and his suit pants, the contact burned. "Eat while you tell me what you found." She picked up her chopsticks, grateful for something to do with her hands other than obsess over the spreadsheet of property transfers on the center screen. Cole and his son have pushed through 23 property seizures in the last 6 years, using variations of the exact same eminent domain clause. Every single one followed the same pattern. Approach small property owners with development partnerships. Get them to sign contracts that look protective but contain the trap language. Then trigger eminent domain through city ordinances that Cole helped draft. She pulled up a network diagram on the left screen. But here's where it gets interesting. Every single seized property eventually ended up owned by one of 3 shell companies. I traced the ownership through 5 layers of corporate cover. They all connect to the same silent partner, the one funding all the acquisitions. Russo, Dante said. His voice dropped to that lethal register. Russo, Amara confirmed. He's not just your rival. He's been systematically targeting properties that would give him strategic control over the city's major development corridors. Your community center site would have completed a continuous ownership block stretching for miles. 23 properties, combined value of nearly $400 million after development. And Cole gets 10% facilitation. Fees plus guaranteed contracts for all city improvements. She turned to look at Dante. His expression was terrifyingly calm. The kind of calm that comes right before something violent. "This isn't just corruption," she continued. "This is organized, systematic theft disguised as urban development. And they've gotten away with it for years because the victims were small," Dante said quietly. "Individuals, families, people without the resources to fight City Hall, and a councilman hiding behind his immunity." "Exactly." Marco's voice cut through from the doorway. "Boss, we have a problem." The tension in his tone made Mara's stomach clench. Dante straightened, his body shifting into full alert. "Show me." Marco pulled up a document on the right screen, and Mara's world tilted sickeningly. It was a scanned letter. On the letterhead of the law firm that had fired her, dated 18 months after her father's death. Her hands went cold. "What is this?" she whispered. "We found it buried in the city's archived settlement files," Marco said carefully. "It's a non-disclosure agreement, signed by your father 8 months before he died. Your father signed this 6 months before he passed, and after his death, your mother inherited the remainder of the settlement terms." "That's impossible." Mara's voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "He never signed anything. He refused to settle. He fought until read the signature clause." Dante said softly. She forced her eyes to focus through the sudden blur of tears. The signature line showed her father's name. But also a second signer, a co-petitioner for the estate settlement. Her mother's name, No. The word came out broken. "No, my mother was devastated. She supported him. There's more." Marco said gently. He pulled up another document. A land deed filed 6 weeks ago. Your mother sold her inherited interest in your father's original property, the interest she kept through the settlement. She sold it to one of Russo's shell companies for $800,000. The room spun. Mara gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles white. She knew. She whispered. She knew about the trap, about the settlement terms, about everything. The non-disclosure agreement explains why your father couldn't pursue legal action after the partial settlement, Dante said, his voice carefully neutral. And why he couldn't tell you the full truth, but your mother wasn't bound by the same restrictions on the inherited interest. She could have fought. Instead, she waited until you were gone and sold to the same people who destroyed him. Mara couldn't breathe. The betrayal crashed over her in waves. Not just Cole's original theft, but her own mother's complicity. The woman who had cried at the funeral, who had held Mara while she sobbed, who had told her to move on, to build a new life, to let go of the anger that was poisoning her, who had been paid to say those words, where is she? Mara's voice came out flat, cold, stripped of everything except the need to know. Florida, Marco said quietly. She bought a beachfront condo, used the money from the sale as the down payment. The Thai food sat forgotten, going cold in its container. Mara stared at the documents on the screen, her mind racing through every memory, every conversation, recontextualizing her entire understanding of the last 2 years. She had been alone, truly, completely alone, and she hadn't even known it. Dante's hand covered hers where it gripped the desk edge, his warmth shocking against her frozen fingers. Breathe, he said softly. You're not alone anymore. She turned to him. And whatever he saw in her face made his expression shift, darken, fill with a protective fury that made her chest ache. She chose money over you, he said, over your father's memory, over justice. That's her sin, Mara, not yours, never yours. The non-disclosure agreement taints the evidence binder, Mara said. She forced her mind back to the legal angles, because that was safer than feeling the full crushing weight of her mother's betrayal. If my father signed a settlement agreement with a non-disclosure clause, using his documents against Cole could be considered a breach. Cole's lawyers will argue that any evidence from the binder is inadmissible because it violates the settlement terms. Then we don't use the binder directly, Dante said. We use it as a map. Every document in there points us toward public records that aren't covered by the agreement, property filings, city permits, council meeting minutes. We rebuild the evidence through independent channels. That will take time, Marco said. Then we take the time, Dante replied. His hand tightened on Mara's, but we do it right, in a way that can't be challenged or dismissed. We build a case so airtight that Cole's immunity won't save him. Mara forced herself to nod, to focus on the path forward rather than the devastation behind. But inside, something fundamental had cracked. The last thread connecting her to the life she had known before had been cut, not by time or distance, but by the bitter reality that her own mother had chosen survival over honor. She was truly alone now, except for the dangerous man beside her, whose hand on hers felt like the only solid thing in a world that had proven itself entirely hollow. I want to see everything, she said, her voice hardening. Every property transfer, every shell company, every piece of this network. I want to understand exactly how deep this goes and exactly how many people need to fall. Dante's lips curved into something dark and approving. Now you're thinking like someone who wants to win, he said softly. And not just someone who wants justice, someone who wants blood. Maybe he was right. Maybe justice and blood were the same thing when the crime was this deep, this personal, this unforgivable. The next 72 hours blurred into an exhausting rhythm of legal research, strategic planning, and the growing, undeniable awareness that Mara was becoming someone entirely new. Not the broken daughter, not the invisible waitress, something sharper, more dangerous. Dante's private study had become her war room. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city's glittering skyline. The city that had nearly destroyed her. The city she was now preparing to hold accountable. The 4th wall was pure function. Whiteboards covered in flowcharts mapping Cole's entire network. Bankers' boxes full of public records. and her father's evidence binder displayed in a frame like the sacred relic it had become. She stood before the whiteboard at 2 a.m, adding another connection line, when Dante came in carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. He had taken off his jacket hours ago. His white shirt was rolled to the elbows, exposing forearms corded with lean muscle. The sight did something to her pulse that had absolutely nothing to do with fear. "You need sleep," he said, handing her the glass. "I need answers," but she accepted the whiskey, let the burn steady her scattered thoughts. "The immunity clause is the problem. We can prove intent, pattern, conspiracy, all of it. But Cole is protected by limited municipal immunity. Civil suits just bounce off him. Criminal charges require extraordinary circumstances and a prosecutor willing to go after a sitting councilman. Then we create extraordinary circumstances," Dante said. He moved to stand beside her at the whiteboard. His shoulder brushed hers. She fought the urge to lean into his warmth. How? By making it impossible for the city to look away from him. By building public pressure so intense that protecting Cole becomes politically toxic. His finger traced one of the connection lines on the board. "But you're focused on the wrong angle. You're thinking like a lawyer. Sue him, prosecute him, win in court. But Cole's power comes from being politically untouchable. We don't beat him in court. First, we beat him in public. Once he's exposed, once voters turn on him, the immunity becomes meaningless because he'll have no political capital left to hide behind." Mara's mind raced. Refocusing, a media campaign, leaked documents, testimony from victims. Exactly. Dante said, "We flood the zone, every major outlet, every platform. We make Cole's name synonymous with corruption." His smile was beautiful and vicious simultaneously. "Then we let the city council turn on him to save themselves. Politicians follow power and public opinion. When Cole becomes a liability, they'll throw him to the wolves themselves." "But the nondis. Closure doesn't cover your testimony about what you witnessed," Dante continued. "Doesn't cover other victims who weren't part of any settlement. Doesn't cover public records we independently verified." His hand came up and cupped her jaw. Tilted her face toward his. "You're not bound by your father's agreement, Mara. You can speak, and when you do, the world will listen." The touch sent heat cascading through her entire body. They had been circling this pull toward each other for days. The accidental brushes, the loaded silences, the way his proximity made her skin feel electric. Now, in the low light of his study, with the city spread out below them like a game board they were about to overturn, the tension finally crystallized into something undeniable. "What if I'm not enough?" The vulnerability in her voice surprised even her. "What if I break before we finish this?" His thumb traced her lower lip. The gesture both tender and possessive. "You've already survived the worst thing that could happen to you," he said softly. "Your father's death, your mother's betrayal, your life being completely stolen. You're still standing, still fighting. You're not going to break now. Not when we're this close." "How can you be so sure?" His other hand came up to cradle her face, and Mara's breath stopped entirely. "Because I see you," he said. "Not the waitress, not the daughter, you. The woman who risked everything to stop me from making a mistake. The lawyer who took apart a legal trap in 60 seconds that my whole team missed. Fighter who won't quit even when the world has given her every reason to surrender." His forehead touched hers. His breath warm against her lips. "I'm sure because I know what it looks like when someone absolutely refuses to be destroyed. And I'm looking at her right now." The kiss was inevitable. Mara closed the distance. Her lips met his in a collision of need and hunger that had been building since that first moment in the dining room. Dante responded instantly, his hands sliding into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. He tasted like whiskey and dark promises. And Mara surrendered to it completely. This was danger she was choosing, desire that felt like falling and flying at the same time. His hands on her body were both possessive and reverent, mapping her curves through her clothes as if memorizing every detail. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were completely black with want. "We should stop," he said. But his hands hadn't left her waist, should we? Her voice came out husky, challenging. You're in a vulnerable place. I'm your protector. This crosses lines. I'm not vulnerable. Mara said fiercely. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing this. Don't take that choice away from me because you think I can't handle what comes with it. Something shifted in his expression. Respect mixing with barely restrained hunger. If we do this, he said carefully, there's no going back. I don't share, Mara. I don't do casual. You become mine and I become yours, and we finish this war together or we don't start at all. Good, she whispered. I don't want casual. I don't want safe. I want whatever this is, this dangerous, impossible thing between us. His control finally broke. He kissed her again, harder this time, walking her backward until her spine met the wall beside the whiteboard. His body pressed against hers, all controlled power and devastating intent. His hands slid under her shirt, warm against her skin, and Mara gasped into his mouth. Tell me to stop, he demanded against her lips. No, his smile was dark victory. Then hold on to me, because once I start, I won't stop until you are completely undone. Marco's sharp knock shattered the moment like glass. Boss, we have a critical development. Dante cursed under his breath, his forehead dropping to Mara's shoulder as he fought to get his control back. After a long moment, he stepped back. His hands steadied her even as he put the necessary distance between them. This isn't over, he promised, his voice rough. I know, Mara managed, her entire body still shaking. He straightened his shirt and opened the door. The mask of controlled authority slid back into place so perfectly, it would have been frightening if she didn't know what lay beneath it now. Marco came in with his tablet, his expression carefully neutral despite obviously having heard absolutely everything. Boss, we found the final piece. He pulled up a document that made Mara's blood run cold. What am I looking at? Dante asked. The original land transfer paperwork for your community center site, Marco said. Dated 4 days before you signed the purchase contract, Cole filed the eminent domain paperwork, but there's another document attached, an assignment of air and mineral rights. To who? Mara asked, already knowing the answer. Russo, through a shell company called Heritage Development Holdings. The land itself might technically be yours after purchase, but the development rights, the actual value, were already transferred before you ever signed a single page. Marco looked between them. The land you were buying was already worthless. This wasn't just a trap. It was a complete theft from the very beginning, disguised as a legitimate sale. Mara's mind raced through the implications. They never intended for Dante to build anything. They were selling him a shell. Property without rights. Even if we void the eminent domain clause, you'd own land you can't use, she said. Which means the civil lawsuit I was planning won't work. Civil court can't unwind a transfer that happened before my contract even existed, Dante said quietly. His voice deadly calm. No, but federal court can. Both men turned to her. Rico, she said, her voice strengthening as the strategy crystallized clearly in her mind. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. This isn't just contract fraud. It's a criminal conspiracy, multiple parties, coordinated across years, designed to systematically steal property. Through municipal corruption, Cole, his son's firm, Russo's funding network, they're not just conspirators, they're an ongoing criminal enterprise. RICO charges require extraordinary evidence. Marco said carefully, we have it. Mara countered. 23 properties, identical patterns, shell companies all connecting to one funding source, a councilman using his political position to enable theft, and now we have proof they filed the seizure paperwork before the sale even happened. That proves premeditation and criminal intent. Dante's smile was sharp and terrible. RICO bypasses Cole's immunity, he said. Federal charges don't care about municipal protections. Exactly, but we still need to move fast. If Cole realizes we found the pre-filing documents, he'll have them destroyed, and we need leverage, something that forces him to fight us publicly instead of making this disappear quietly. The media campaign, Amara said. We file the RICO suit and simultaneously release everything to every major outlet. Cole can't make it vanish if the entire city is watching. He'll fight back, Dante warned. He'll use your mother's settlement against you. He'll attack your credibility. He'll make this ugly. Mara met his gaze without flinching. Let him try. I'm done hiding. I'm done being invisible. He took everything from me once. He doesn't get to do it again. Dante crossed to her. His hand cupped the back of her neck, a gesture that was both possessive and protective at once. Then we do this together, but we do it smart. We need one more thing before we file. What? His eyes glinted with dark satisfaction. We need Cole to make a mistake. A public, undeniable mistake that proves he is exactly what we say he is, and I know precisely how to make that happen. Marco cleared his throat from the doorway. Boss, one more complication. The immunity clause you mentioned. Cole has it, but it's not absolute. His municipal immunity only extends to actions taken in his official capacity. If we can prove he acted outside his role as a councilman. If we can show personal profit or criminal intent behind those actions, the immunity shield collapses. Mara's pulse quickened. The facilitation fees, 10% of every property seizure going directly to his son's firm. That's not official business. That's personal enrichment through abuse of office. Enrico's statutes specifically address public corruption, Dante added, his voice dropping to that lethal register. If we prove Cole used his position for personal gain through an ongoing criminal conspiracy, the immunity becomes completely irrelevant. But we still need to win in public opinion first. Mara insisted. The federal prosecutor won't touch this unless there's real political will behind it. We need the city demanding his head before we can serve it to them on a legal platter. Dante's hand slid down her spine, coming to rest at the small of her back, an intimate touch that sent heat pooling low in her stomach despite the intensity of what they were planning. Then we give them a show they can't ignore, he said softly. Tomorrow morning we hold a press conference, you, me, 3 of the victims Marco located. We lay out the pattern, we name names, we present the evidence of systematic theft, and we file the RICO suit live on camera so Cole can't suppress it. He'll retaliate immediately, Marco warned. I'm counting on it, Dante replied. Every move he makes gets documented. Every threat becomes evidence. He's used to operating in shadows, buying silence, making problems disappear quietly. We're going to force him into the light and watch him destroy himself. Mara felt something settle in her chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. Clarity. For 2 years she had been running, hiding, surviving. Now she was finally fighting back, and she wasn't alone anymore. There's one more thing, she said quietly. My mother, the settlement she took. Is there any way to— No, Dante interrupted gently. She made her choice. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Focus on what you can control, destroying Cole, reclaiming your father's honor, and building the future you deserve. The finality in his tone was almost comforting. Permission to let go of the last thread still binding her to a family that had proven itself broken. Okay, she whispered. Dante pulled her closer. His lips brushed her temple. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we go to war, and I need you sharp. What about you? His smile was dark and beautiful. I have preparations to make, people to call, favors to collect. By the time the sun rises, every major outlet in this city will be ready to carry our story. Cole won't know what hit him. Marco excused himself, leaving them alone in the study. The whiteboard behind them held the map of their revenge. The city beyond the windows glittered with 1,000 lights. Thousands of lives unaware that tomorrow the carefully maintained fiction of civic virtue was about to shatter. Mara turned in Dante's arms, her hands sliding up his chest to rest against his shoulders. When this is over, she began. When this is over, he interrupted. You stay with me, not as my employee, not as someone I'm protecting, as mine, completely, permanently. No more hiding who you are. No more pretending to be less than you are. You stand beside me and we build something that matters, understood? The declaration was pure Dante, commanding. Absolute, leaving no room for negotiation. But Mara had learned something important about herself over these past few days. She didn't want negotiation. She wanted exactly this, someone who saw her completely, who demanded everything from her, who matched her darkness with his own and called it beautiful, understood, she agreed, his kiss was searing, a promise of everything that would come after the war was won. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "Go," he said, his voice rough, "sleep. Tomorrow changes everything." Mara left him standing in his study. Silhouetted against the city, he controlled, planning moves in a game she was only beginning to fully understand. But as she walked to the guest room he had given her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope, dark, dangerous, sharp-edged hope. The kind that comes from finally knowing you have the weapons to fight back. The kind that comes from having someone powerful enough to stand with you against impossible odds. Tomorrow, Councilman Richard Cole would wake up to find his carefully constructed empire under siege. Tomorrow, the daughter of a man he had destroyed would step into the light and tell the truth he had paid to bury. Tomorrow, the invisible Waitress would become visible in a way that would shake the city's power structure to its foundation. But tonight, Mara allowed herself to sleep peacefully for the first time in 2 years, knowing that justice, real, unflinching justice, was finally within reach, and that the dangerous man down the hall would burn the entire city down before he would ever let anyone take it from her again. The morning air carried the smell of coming rain and something that felt like revolution. Mara stood before the floor-length mirror in Dante's penthouse, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. The tailored charcoal suit hugged her curves with precision, expensive fabric that whispered power with every movement. Her natural hair was swept back into a sleek low bun that exposed the elegant line of her neck. Diamond studs, Dante's insistence, borrowed from a collection he claimed belonged to no one, caught the morning light. She looked like a weapon being sharpened for battle. "You're ready?" Dante's voice came from behind her. Rough silk in the quiet room, he appeared in the mirror's reflection, immaculate in a black suit that made him look like vengeance walking in human form. His eyes traveled the length of her body with an intensity that made her skin flush hot despite the cool air. "I don't feel ready," she admitted, her fingers trembling as she adjusted the collar of her crisp white shirt. He closed the distance between them in 3 measured steps, his hands settled on her shoulders, warm and possessive through the fabric. In the mirror, they looked like what they were becoming, 2 people bound by something far more dangerous than attraction. "Cole will retaliate the moment you file," he said, his breath stirring the fine hairs at her temple. "He'll go for your throat, he'll try to destroy what's left of your credibility, your family name, everything, I know, and you're still going through with this. Not a question." A statement of fact laced with something that sounded unmistakably like pride. Mara met his eyes in the reflection. "My father died believing he had failed, that he was weak, stupid, incompetent. I'm going to make sure the entire city knows the truth, that he was murdered by men who hide behind the law and behind power. Whatever Cole throws at me, I'll survive it. I've survived worse." Dante's hand slid slowly down her arms, a caress that left trails of heat in its wake. He turned her to face him, and the intensity in his gaze stole the breath completely from her lungs. "You're not just surviving anymore, Mara, you're conquering." His thumb traced her lower lip, her pulse stumbled, "And after today, there's no going back to invisible. You understand that, yes?" The woman who walks into that press conference won't be the Waitress anymore. She'll be the enemy of one of the most powerful men in this city. She'll have a target on her back that never goes away. Mara placed her hand over his where it cradled her face. "Then it's a good thing I have you." Something dark and possessive flashed in his eyes. "You do, completely. Anyone who comes for you comes through me first. But I need to know you're prepared for what that means. The violence, the ugliness, the reality that some battles are won with blood instead of words." She thought of her father's hollow eyes in that hospital bed, the way her mother had sold his memory for beachfront property. The 2 years she had spent erased, invisible, half alive. "I'm prepared," she said, her voice steady and cold. Let's burn it all down." His smile was beautiful and terrible. Then he kissed her, hard, claiming, a brand that seared through every defense she had ever built. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "Go show them who you really are." The conference room blazed with camera lights and the hungry energy of journalists who could smell blood in the water. Mara stood at the podium, flanked by 3 other victims, middle-aged men and women who had lost everything to Cole's carefully crafted traps. Behind them, projected on a massive screen, was the network diagram she and Dante had built. 23 properties, millions in stolen value, all connecting back to Cole and Russo. Dante stood at the back of the room, a shadow in expensive tailoring, his presence a silent, unwavering promise of protection and power. Mara's hands gripped the edges of the podium. The microphone weighted like a loaded weapon. "My name is Mara," she began, her voice carrying clear and strong over the crowd. 3 years ago, my father, David, lost his commercial property to what he believed was a legitimate city development project. He died 6 months later, broken by the loss and by the belief that he had failed his own family through his own incompetence. She paused, let the weight of those words settle across the room. He didn't fail. He was murdered, not with a weapon, with documents designed to look protective while being pure poison. The same man who killed my father tried to do it again last week to another property owner, using the exact same legal trap, the exact same predatory language. The room erupted with questions. Mara raised her hand. The authority in the gesture silenced them. "Today we are filing a federal RICO lawsuit against Councilman Richard Cole, his son Adam Cole, and their network of shell companies. The evidence shows a coordinated criminal conspiracy spanning 6 years, involving the systematic theft of property through the abuse of municipal power. 23 families, $400 million in stolen property value. One councilman who used his immunity like a shield while he destroyed lives for personal profit." She nodded to Marco. He distributed folders to every journalist in the room. "You have copies of the public filings, the property transfer patterns, and the testimony of multiple victims. This isn't speculation. This is documented theft disguised as civic development. And today it ends." The questions came in a flood. Mara answered each one with the precision of the lawyer she had been trained to be. Her responses sharp and backed by evidence no one could argue with. Through it all, she felt Dante's gaze on her. Steady, burning, proud, this was power, not the kind that came from hiding. The kind forged in fire and wielded without apology. The retaliation came within hours. Mara sat in Dante's car as Marco drove them back to the penthouse. Her phone exploding with notifications, news alerts, social media mentions, and then the one that made her blood run cold. Disgraced lawyer's daughter weaponizes grief. Mother reveals truth about family settlement. Her hands went numb. The article loaded with agonizing slowness, each word a knife twisting deeper. In a shocking development, Margaret, mother of the woman leading today's controversial lawsuit, has come forward with documents proving her late husband accepted a settlement from the city 3 years ago. Margaret, speaking from her home in Florida, expressed concern that her daughter is weaponizing grief and manipulating facts to pursue a personal vendetta against Councilman Cole, who Margaret describes as a fair and honest public servant who tried to help our family during a difficult time. The article included photos. Her mother on a pristine beach, her mother's signature on documents Mara had never seen. Her mother's tearful interview claiming Mara had abandoned the family and was now destroying innocent people's reputations for attention. The world tilted. Mara's vision blurred as her chest constricted with the kind of pain that has no physical source. The agony of betrayal made public, weaponized, used to tear apart the last shreds of her credibility. "Pull over," she managed, her voice breaking. Marco complied immediately. The car rolled to a stop in an empty parking structure. Mara shoved the door open and stumbled out into the concrete cold. She braced herself against the car, gulping air that wouldn't fill her lungs. Her entire body shaking with grief so profound it felt like drowning. She didn't hear Dante exit the car. didn't register his approach until his hands were on her shoulders, turning her into his chest. He didn't speak, didn't offer empty words, just held her while she fell apart against him. Her fingers clutching his jacket like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. She sold me, Mara choked out between sobs. She sold my father's memory, and now she's helping them destroy me. Dante's arms tightened around her, one hand cradling the back of her head. She made her choice. Cole paid her to be his weapon, but she miscalculated. How? The question came out broken. Because she doesn't understand what you are. He pulled back just enough to tilt her face up to his. His thumbs wiped away her tears with devastating gentleness. You're not the grieving daughter anymore, Mara. You're the woman who walked into a room full of predators and made them afraid. One interview from a bot mother changes nothing about the evidence. Nothing about the truth. The media will crucify me. Let them try. His voice dropped to that lethal register. Marco is already on it, already moving, boss. Marco confirmed from beside the car. 3 journalists who owe us favors are ready to run counter stories by tonight. We're framing this exactly as it is. A grieving woman being used as a political weapon by the same man who destroyed her family. Cole thinks he's discrediting you. Instead, he's proving your entire case. That he goes after the vulnerable and buys their silence. Mara forced herself to breathe, to think like the strategist she had become, rather than the broken daughter she had been. The settlement documents, if they're real, they do taint my father's direct testimony. But they also prove Cole paid to buy silence, which actually supports the RICO pattern of obstruction and witness tampering. Exactly, Dante said. His hand slid to cup her jaw. Every move Cole makes now is evidence. Every attack is ammunition. He's used to fighting in shadows, buying silence, making problems disappear quietly. We forced him into the light, and now he's panicking. Panic makes people sloppy. What do? His smile was dark and beautiful. We double down tonight. You go on the evening news, you show them that face, the one that just cried for your father's honor. You tell them Cole is so desperate to hide his crimes that he weaponizing a grieving mother against her own daughter. You make this city see exactly who they're dealing with. I don't know if I can. Yes, you can. His forehead touched hers. His voice softened to something almost tender. Because you're not alone anymore. Because I'm standing beside you. Because we're going to win this, Mara. And your father's name will be cleared. I promise you that. The conviction in his voice cracked something open inside her chest. Not despair this time. Something hotter. Fiercer rage. Okay, she whispered. Let's make them pay. By nightfall, the narrative had shifted completely. 3 major outlets ran stories questioning Cole's tactics and highlighting the suspicious timing of her mother's sudden public appearance. Social media exploded with support for Mara. The hashtag Justice for the Kennedys trended alongside brutal takedowns of Cole's entire record. And Mara, her eyes still red from crying, but her voice steady and cold, gave an interview that would be replayed for weeks. My mother made her choice, she said, looking directly into the camera. Cole paid for her loyalty just like he's paid for everything else he's stolen. But I am my father's daughter, and I don't break, I don't bend, I don't disappear quietly. So let Councilman Cole keep attacking. Every move he makes proves exactly what I've been saying, that he's a predator who destroys families and hides behind power. But his power ends the moment this city decides they've had enough, and I think they already have. Back in the penthouse with the city glittering below them and the smell of rain finally breaking through the heat, Mara stood at the windows feeling hollowed out and strangely alive all at once. Dante appeared with 2 glasses of whiskey, handing her one before settling beside her. Their shoulders touched. The contact was grounding. You did well tonight, he said quietly. I cried on camera. You showed them you're human, that you've lost something real. Cole can't compete with that. His humanity is a lie wrapped in expensive suits. Yours is raw and undeniable. She sipped the whiskey. Let it burn away the last traces of tears. What happens now? Now we wait for him to make his next mistake. And while we wait, his hand found hers, their fingers tangling together. We prepare for the immunity fight. Because that's where this war will actually be won or lost. Mara turned to him, studying the sharp planes of his face in the low light. This man who had given her weapons when she had none, who had stood between her and destruction without flinching, who had traded pieces of his own world to protect her heart. Why, she asked softly, why do you care this much? His free hand came up to cradle her face, and the look in his eyes was almost painful in its intensity. Because you walked into my world and saved me from becoming the monster I was trying not to be, he said. Because your courage reminds me why I started fighting in the first place. Because when I look at you, I see someone who refuses to be destroyed no matter how hard the world tries. He leaned in, his lips hovering just above hers. And because the moment you spoke up in that dining room, something inside me recognized something inside you, like calls to like, darkness to darkness, survivor to survivor. The kiss was inevitable. Mara closed the distance, pouring every ounce of her gratitude, her rage, her desperate need into the press of her mouth against his. Dante responded with controlled hunger, his hands sliding into her hair, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened into something fierce and consuming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. After we destroy Cole, he said, his voice rough, I'm keeping you, permanently, completely, no more hiding, no more half measures. You become mine and I become yours, and we build something that matters. Agreed. Mara's answer was another kiss, fierce and claiming, a yes written in the language they both understood best. Absolute, uncompromising commitment forged in fire. Outside, the rain finally came, washing the city clean while inside. Two people who had been broken by it began planning how to remake it in their own image. The courthouse smelled of old wood polish and barely contained tension. Mara sat at the plaintiff's table in another borrowed suit. This one midnight blue that made her skin glow against the stark white of her blouse. Her hands rested calmly on the table surface. But beneath the surface of composure, her heart hammered against her ribs. Cole's legal team filled the defense table. 6 attorneys in matching power suits, their combined presence designed entirely to intimidate, but it was Cole himself who commanded the room. Silver-haired, distinguished, wearing his councilman's authority like body armor, he radiated the absolute confidence of a man who had never once faced real consequences for his actions. Their eyes met across the courtroom. Cole's smile was cold and dismissive, the look of a predator who believed he had already won. Mara smiled back, let him underestimate her. Judge Patricia Morgan entered, and the courtroom rose. Morgan was known for her sharp mind and zero tolerance for legal games. Exactly the judge they needed. We're here on a motion to dismiss based on limited municipal immunity, Morgan said, settling into her chair with the weariness of someone who had seen every trick in existence. Counselor Cole, you may proceed. Adam Cole, younger, sharper than his father, his cruelty refined into polished confidence, rose smoothly. Your Honor, Councilman Cole's actions, as outlined in the complaint, were taken entirely within his official capacity as a city council member. Limited municipal immunity shields elected officials from civil liability for discretionary acts performed in good faith. The plaintiff's RICO allegations, while sensational, do not overcome that immunity. We move for immediate dismissal. The argument was clean, practiced, designed to shut down the case before it could draw a single breath. Judge Morgan turned to Mara. Miss Mara. Mara stood, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. She moved to the podium with the controlled grace of a woman who had spent 3 years being invisible and had finally, permanently decided to be seen. Your Honor, the defense is correct that limited immunity exists, but it is not absolute. Immunity shields officials from liability for discretionary governmental functions performed in good faith. The key phrase is in good faith. She pulled up a document on the courtroom display screen, the pre-filed eminent domain paperwork Marco had uncovered. 4 days before my client was scheduled to sign the purchase contract, Councilman Cole filed eminent domain paperwork for that exact property, not after the sale, before it, which means he wasn't. exercising discretionary governmental authority. He was orchestrating a criminal conspiracy to defraud. Adam Cole shot to his feet. Objection, pure speculation. It's dated evidence from the city's own files. Amara cut in smoothly. Your Honor, immunity does not apply when an official acts with malice or outside the scope of their actual authority. Filing a seizure for property not yet owned by anyone isn't governance. It's theft with premeditation, that is criminal conduct, and it destroys any immunity claim entirely. Morgan leaned forward. Studying the document, Counselor Cole, how do you explain this filing date? Adam Cole's composure cracked for just a moment, a flicker of genuine panic before the mask reassembled itself. The filing was precautionary, standard procedure for properties under consideration for future municipal use. 4 days before a private sale, Morgan's skepticism was obvious. That is not procedure, that is specific intent. Amara pressed the advantage. Your Honor, we're also filing a writ of mandamus compelling the city to open their archived land trans, or records for the past 7 years. If Cole's immunity claim has any merit, those records will support it. But if they show a pattern of pre-filed seizures coordinated with private sales, which we believe they will, then we've established systematic criminal conduct that no immunity can shield. The courtroom erupted. Cole's team shouted objections while reporters in the gallery furiously typed every word. But Morgan's gavel came down with absolute finality. Motion to dismiss is denied. The writ of mandamus is granted. The city archives will be opened under court supervision within 48 hours. She fixed Cole with a withering look. Counselor, if those archives contain what this plaint, if suggests, you and your client will have far bigger problems than a civil suit. This court is adjourned. Mara barely made it to the courthouse steps before Dante's hand caught her elbow. He spun her into the shelter of a marble column, away from the cameras. His eyes blazed with something fierce and proud. You completely dismantled him, he said, his voice rough with barely restrained emotion. The archives are the key, Mara replied, though her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. If Cole realizes what's in there before we can secure it, he already knows. Dante's jaw tightened, which means he's going to try to destroy the evidence before the court can catalog it. We have a 48-hour window. What do we do? His smile was dangerous. We don't wait for the court, we go tonight. Chicago City Hall after midnight was a cathedral of shadows and secrets. The building loomed against the night sky, its windows dark except for the scattered lights of cleaning crews and late, working staff. Mara stood in the alley beside Dante's car. Her practical clothes, black jeans, dark sweater, hair tied back, a stark contrast to the courtroom power suits. This is illegal, she said, though her pulse was racing with anticipation rather than fear. Highly, Dante agreed. He had taken off his suit jacket, working now in a black button-down that made him look like danger made human. But the writ gives us legal access in 48 hours. We're just moving ahead of schedule. Marco emerged from the building's service entrance, his expression grim. Security rotation just changed. You have a 12-minute window before the next sweep of the basement archives. Cameras on the east stairwell are already looped. Once you're in, you're invisible. How do we find the right documents? Amara asked. You tell me, Dante said. He handed her a building schematic. You know how these systems work? Where would they file fraudulent land transfers? Amara studied the map, her lawyer's brain clicking into gear. Real property division. Sublevel 2. Physical files would be in the auxiliary storage, organized by district and date. If Cole filed those seizures, they'd be referenced under both the property address and the municipal project code. Then that's where we go. Dante's hand found the small of her back. Stay close, stay quiet. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, Mara interrupted. We didn't come this far to fail now. Their eyes met in the darkness. Something passed between them, understanding, trust. Absolute certainty that they would face whatever came next together. The archives smelled of dust, old paper, and decades of buried secrets. Mara moved through the narrow aisles between towering filing cabinets, her small flashlight casting golden circles on faded labels. Dante followed like a shadow, his presence both protection and distraction. She was painfully aware of his body heat in the cold basement, the controlled power in his every movement. District 7, 2019 to 2022, she whispered, running her fingers along the cabinet labels. This is it. Drawer stuck. Dante moved behind her, his arms bracketing her body as he gripped the handle and pulled with controlled force. The metal shrieked softly, then gave way. The closeness made Mara's breath hitch, his chest against her back, his jaw near her temple, the scent of him overwhelming in the confined space. Found it. She managed, forcing her focus to the files in front of her. Her hands trembled as she pulled the first folder. There, the eminent domain filing for her father's property, dated 8 months before the actual seizure, and another, 23 properties, all with pre-filed paperwork, all following the exact same pattern. They kept everything. She breathed. Every fraudulent filing. Every bit of evidence. They thought immunity made them completely untouchable. Photograph every page, Dante said. He handed her his phone. We need copies in multiple places in case. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. They froze. Mara's pulse spiked as she recognized the voices. Cole and 2 others, their words carrying clearly through the basement's acoustic quirks. Should have been destroyed years ago. That woman's writ forces our hand. The files are comprehensive. The second voice, Adam Cole. If they're cataloged before we can clean them, we're finished. Then we clean them now. Burn everything in District 7. Make it look like an electrical fire. By the time investigators sort through the damage, we'll have rewritten the narrative. Mara's blood ran cold. They were going to destroy everything, not just her evidence. Decades of records that could free other victims, expose the full scope of Cole's crimes. Dante's hand pressed against her mouth, silencing her instinctive protest, his other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her deeper into the shadows between cabinets. They pressed together in the darkness, her back to his chest, barely breathing as footsteps approached their aisle. The beam of a flashlight swept past, missing them by inches. Mara felt Dante's heart hammering against her spine, his breath warm against her ear, his hand on her stomach flexed protectively, and despite the terror of being discovered, he coiled low in her belly at the intimacy of their position, hidden together in darkness, sharing breath and space and danger. Start with the 19 through 20 cabinets, Cole's voice commanded. Everything burns. The footsteps moved away toward the far end of the archives. Dante's lips brushed Mara's ear as he whispered, "We need to move now." But moving meant leaving the files, leaving the evidence, letting Cole erase the proof that could free not just her father's name, but dozens of other victims. No, Mara breathed. We take everything we can carry. He doesn't get to erase them again. For a heartbeat, she thought Dante would argue. Then his arms released her and he moved to the cabinet with deadly efficiency. Grab what you can. Prioritize anything with Cole's signature or your father's property code. 60 seconds. Then we run. They worked in frantic silence, pulling files and stuffing them into Mara's backpack and inside their clothing. The smell of gasoline drifted through the archives, followed by the distinctive click of a lighter. Time's up, Dante hissed. Smoke began curling through the aisles. Mara grabbed one last folder, her father's complete file, the one with his signature still visible on the fraudulent documents, and then Dante's hand closed around her wrist and they were running. Behind them, flames caught with a hungry roar. They burst through the service exit just as the fire alarm shrieked to life. Marco already had the car running and the door open. They dove into the back seat in a tangle of limbs and stolen files. The vehicle peeled away into the night as sirens wailed in the distance. Mara's lungs burned from smoke and exertion. Beside her, Dante coughed roughly, his hands still gripping hers with bruising intensity. Their eyes met in the dim interior, and suddenly the laughter came, wild, breathless, edged with the manic relief of pure survival. "We just committed arson, evasion, and evidence theft." Mara gasped between laughs. "Technically, we committed arson," Dante corrected, his grin sharp and beautiful. "We just refused to let them succeed." The files lay scattered between them, proof of Cole's crimes, rescued from the flames that were meant to erase them forever. Mara picked up her father's folder with shaking hands, her laughter dying as the weight of what they had just saved settled over her. "We have enough," she whispered. "Prove everything." To clear his name. Dante's hand cupped her face, tilting her gaze to his. His thumb traced her lower lip. "We have enough to destroy them." He agreed softly. Tomorrow we turn this over to federal prosecutors. Cole just committed arson to obstruct a federal investigation. That's a crime even his immunity cannot protect him from. What if it's not enough? It will be. His forehead touched hers. His voice dropped to that intimate register that made her whole body aware of him. Because you're brilliant. Because you refused to give up. Because you walked into a burning building for your father's honor. And that kind of courage doesn't lose. The car slowed at a red light, and in that suspended moment, with smoke on their clothes and rescued evidence scattered around them, and the taste of victory, finally, impossibly within reach, Mara kissed him, not gentle, not tentative, a claiming kiss that tasted of ash and triumph, and the desperate need to feel completely alive after dancing too close to death. Dante responded with matching hunger, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened into something fierce and consuming. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes were completely black with desire and promise. Tonight we secure the evidence, he said, his voice rough. Tomorrow we finish this. And after, Amara interrupted. You keep your promise. I'm yours, completely, permanently. No more half measures. His smile was devastating. I'm holding you to that. The light changed, the car moved forward, and behind them, City Hall burned with all of Cole's carefully buried secrets. Those cabinets were part of the old archival wing, not yet upgraded to fire suppression systems, which is why the files had been so vulnerable. While in Dante's secured vehicle, the evidence that would destroy him sat rescued and ready for its moment in the light. 3 days after the City Hall fire, Mara stood in a neutral conference room that smelled of expensive coffee and barely concealed desperation. The space was sterile, corporate, chosen specifically because it belonged to neither side, a no-man's land for the kind of negotiations that would never appear in any official record. Across the table sat Russo. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 40, with the kind of carefully constructed attractiveness that came from excellent tailoring and even better genetics. His suit was perfect, his watch probably worth 6 figures, but it was his eyes that told the real story, cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who had built his empire on other people's ruin and felt absolutely no guilt about any of it. Dante sat beside Mara, his presence radiating controlled menace. Marco stood by the door, looking casual, but positioned to intercept any threat. The weight of the moment pressed down like something physical. Miss Mara, Russo said, his voice carrying the barest trace of an accent. The woman who has caused so much trouble for my business interests. I must say I'm impressed. Most people Cole destroys stay destroyed. Most people don't have what I have, Mara replied evenly. And what's that? A disgraced lawyer's determination. A dangerous man's protection. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Those things are fragile, Miss Mara. Easily broken when the right pressure is applied. Is that a threat? Dante's voice dropped to that lethal register. An observation. Russo spread his hands in a gesture of false reasonableness. You've both fought admirably. The Rico suit, the media campaign, even last week's dramatic evidence rescue from the fire, very cinematic. But you're still missing the one thing that actually matters, which is, Mara asked, though ice was already forming in her stomach. Russo pulled a slim folder from his briefcase and slid it across the table. The original documents proving your father's innocence. Not the circumstantial evidence you rescued from the archives, not the pattern analysis showing Cole's crimes. The actual proof that your father was specifically targeted, set up, and deliberately framed as incompetent when he was actually the victim of calculated fraud. Mara's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were documents she had never seen before. Internal emails between Cole and his son discussing her father by name. Appraisal reports showing deliberate undervaluation. A handwritten note from Cole himself, target the Pilsen property. Kennedy's too proud to fight, and the location completes the corridor. These were the smoking gun, the proof that would transform her father from a cautionary tale about failed business dealings into a recognized victim of criminal conspiracy. Why are you showing me this? Her voice came out hoarse. Because I'm a businessman and Cole has become a liability I can no longer afford. Russo said. He leaned back in his chair, supremely confident. The fire. The federal attention. the media scrutiny, it's all become too expensive. So I'm willing to provide you with everything you need to destroy him completely. Evidence that will not only clear your father's name, but prove premeditation, malice, and specific criminal intent to defraud. What's the price? Dante asked. Russo's smile widened. The community center. You give me the naming rights, the development control, and 51% ownership. In exchange, Mara gets her father's vindication. And you both get to walk away from this war without the kind of permanent enemies that tend to shorten lifespans considerably. The silence that followed was suffocating. Mara's mind raced through the implications. The center was Dante's act of penance, his attempt to build something good from years of causing harm. Giving Russo control would corrupt that mission, turn it into just another profit vehicle for exactly the kind of man who had enabled Cole's crimes in the first place. But without these documents, her father would remain a cautionary tale. She could prove Cole's pattern, maybe even win the RICO case, but she couldn't definitively clear her father's name, couldn't give him back the dignity Cole had stolen from him. No, Dante said. Mara turned to him, shock stealing. Her voice, the center is my penance. He continued, his gaze locked on Russo. But David's honor is worth more than my redemption. Accept the deal. Give him the center. Dante. He placed his hand over hers on the table, silencing her. Your father died believing he was a failure, he said, his voice softening as he looked at her. That shame killed him as surely as the stress did. This evidence erases that shame. It rewrites his legacy from victim to martyr. That's worth any price. He turned back to Russo, but the community will still get their center. It will just be called something else. And I'll find another way to earn my redemption. But she only gets one chance to save her father's memory. So, yes, we take the deal. Tears burned in Mara's eyes. She looked down at the documents, proof of her father's innocence, finally within reach, then at Dante, who was offering to sacrifice the one thing that mattered most to him, to give her what she needed most. Why? She whispered, because some debts are worth paying. His hand tightened on hers. Because your father deserves justice more than I deserve forgiveness. Because, his voice dropped so only she could hear, because I love you. And this is what love looks like when it's real. The words hit her like a physical blow, not a declaration meant to manipulate or seduce. A truth offered in the moment it mattered most. When he was choosing her pain over his own redemption, Mara turned back to Russo, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. We accept the center for the documents. But I want one additional term. You destroy every remaining copy of the trap contract, every template, every single version of it. No one else gets destroyed the way my father was. Russo considered this for a moment, then nodded, agreed. Cole's methods were always too messy. I prefer cleaner business practices. He slid a contract across the table. Sign here. Both of you? And your father's vindication will be delivered to the federal prosecutor's office by morning. Dante signed first, his signature bold and unwavering. Then Mara added hers below, her hand steady, even as her heart cracked and mended at the same time. It was done. The call came at dawn. Mara woke in Dante's bed, where she had been sleeping for the past week. Their relationship having crossed that final threshold the night after the archive fire. His arm was heavy across her waist. His body curved protectively around hers even in sleep. Her phone buzzed. Marco's name flashed on the screen. Cole's been arrested, Marco said without preamble. Federal agents picked him up 2 hours ago at the airport. He was trying to board a private flight out of the country. The charges include racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and witness tampering. The prosecutor is calling it one of the largest municipal corruption cases in this city's history. Mara's breath caught, and my father. The evidence Russo provided was delivered as promised. It's already been filed with the court as part of the RICO case. By noon, every major outlet will be running stories about your father, not as a failed businessman, as the first known victim of Cole's systematic fraud. His name is being cleared, Mara, publicly. Permanently. The phone slipped from her hand. Dante woke immediately, his arms tightening around her as she began to shake with sobs, not of grief this time, of relief so profound it felt like Being completely reborn, we won. She gasped against his chest. We actually won. I know, he murmured, his lips against her hair. I know, baby. It's over. You can rest now. But Mara pulled back, needing to see his face in the pale morning light. His eyes were soft in a way she had rarely seen. His guard completely down. You gave up your center for me, she said. I'd give up everything for you. He replied simply. The center was about my past, you're my future. There's no comparison. She kissed him then, soft at first, then deepening as gratitude and love and desperate need collided. His hands slid under the tiche, she had borrowed from him, warm against her bare skin, and Mara arched into his touch with a hunger that had been building for weeks. I love you, she whispered against his mouth. I love you for being ruthless and protective and willing to burn the world down for what matters. I love you for being brave enough to fight back. He replied, his voice rough with emotion, for refusing to stay broken, for trusting me with your scars. They came together with the urgency of people who had survived a war and needed to prove they were still alive. His mouth traced fire down her throat while her hands mapped the lean lines of his back. The morning light painted them both gold as everything else fell away. And when Mara finally cried out his name, it was both surrender and victory. The sound of a woman who had reclaimed not just her father's honor, but her own fierce, unbreakable heart. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathless and finally, genuinely at peace, while the city outside woke up to the news that would reshape its power structure completely. What happens now? Mara asked, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his chest. Now you become my chief legal counsel, Dante said. Now we finish dismantling Cole's network and free every victim we can find. Now we build something better than what we destroyed. And us. He rolled to face her, his dark eyes intense. Us. We're permanent, absolute. You're mine, Mara, and I'm yours. No more hiding. No more pretending to be less than you are. We stand together and face whatever comes next, even when it's dangerous, especially when it's dangerous. His smile was sharp and beautiful. We're not built for safe, baby. We're built for this, the fight, the fire. The absolute certainty that we would tear the world apart before we'd let it separate us. Mara kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise with her body and her heart. Outside the windows, the city glittered with morning light. Somewhere, Richard Cole sat in a federal holding cell, his empire crumbling around him. Somewhere, victims were waking to headlines that would finally validate everything they had lost. And somewhere, her father's legacy was being rewritten, from failure to martyr. A man who had been destroyed by corruption, but whose daughter had refused to let his death be meaningless. It wasn't a happy ending, it was something better. A hard, one victory that carried scars and cost everything but proved that justice, real justice, was possible when you were willing to pay the price. And Mara, who had spent 2 years invisible and broken, had finally learned the truth her father never got to know. Sometimes the only way to win is to stop hiding and become the weapon your enemies never saw coming. 3 months later, the groundbreaking ceremony took place on a crisp October morning when the air carried the promise of winter and new beginnings. The empty lot in the neighborhood that had nearly been stolen by Cole's trap now bustled with camera crews, city officials, and community members who had fought for years to have their voices heard. Mara stood at the edge of the gathering, watching the crowd with a sense of surreal peace. She wore a burgundy suit that hugged her curves with elegant precision, her hair twisted into a sophisticated updo that exposed the graceful line of her neck. The diamond pendant at her throat, a gift from Dante given the morning after Cole's arrest, caught the autumn light like captured fire. She looked like power, felt like power, was power in a way that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with hard. One authority, Miss Mara. A reporter approached, microphone extended. How does it feel to be here today, after everything you've been through? Mara turned to face the camera, and her smile was genuine. It feels like justice, not just for my father, but for every family Cole destroyed. This center represents what's possible when people refuse to accept that corruption wins. It represents hope. And your father, knowing that his name has been cleared, the question still hurt, but it was a clean pain now. Grief without the poison of shame. My father was a good man who was destroyed by criminals hiding behind the law. Today, everyone knows that his legacy isn't failure anymore. It's courage. The courage to build something meaningful, even knowing that powerful people wanted to steal it. I wish he were here to see this, but I think somehow he knows. The reporter nodded respectfully and moved on. Mara felt Dante's presence before his hand settled at the small of her back, a gesture that had become their silent language of connection. "Ready?" he asked softly. She turned to look at him. He was devastating in a charcoal suit, the autumn wind ruffling his dark hair. His eyes warm in a way they had never been before she had walked into his life. This man who had given up his redemption to save hers, who had stood beside her through every single battle, who had taught her that love could be dangerous and safe simultaneously. "Ready," she confirmed. They moved to the podium together, and when the crowd quieted, it was Mara who spoke first. 3 months ago, this site was at the center of one of the largest corruption scandals in this city's history. She began, her voice carrying clear and strong. Councilman Richard Cole and his associates attempted to steal this land through the same fraudulent methods they had used to destroy dozens of families, including mine, but this community fought back, and today we're not just breaking ground on a new community center. We're breaking ground on a new promise that this city belongs to everyone, not just the powerful few who think they can take whatever they want. The crowd erupted in applause. Mara stepped back. Dante moved to the microphone. "This center will provide educational resources, small business support, and community gathering space," he said. "It will be managed by a board composed entirely of residents from this neighborhood, ensuring it serves the people who need it most." He paused, his eyes finding Mara's, "and it will be called the David Kennedy Memorial Center for Community Justice." Mara's breath stopped. That wasn't the name Russo had claimed. That was her father's name, on something permanent. It took months of negotiations and pressure on Russo's partners, Dante said quietly, speaking to her now rather than the crowd. "But I secured the naming rights back. Cost me everything I had set aside for this project and then some. But your father's name deserves to be on something that represents everything he believed in. Community, justice, and the courage to build something meaningful even when it's dangerous." Tears blurred her vision. The crowd was applauding again, but Mara barely heard them over the roaring of her own heart. She crossed to Dante, not caring about the cameras, not caring about protocol, and kissed him with everything she had. Gratitude and love and the bone. Deep understanding that she had found something more valuable than vindication. She had found home. When they broke apart, Dante's hand cupped her face, his thumb wiping away her tears. "Your father's legacy is permanent now," he said softly, "and so are we." That evening, back in the penthouse that had become their shared sanctuary, Mara stood at the windows overlooking the city she had once feared and now commanded. Dante joined her carrying 2 glasses of wine. They stood together in comfortable silence as the sun set. Marco finished cataloging the final victims from Cole's network. Dante said, 47 families in total. We're establishing a restitution fund to help them recover using Russo's settlement payment." Mara smiled. Among other sources, his smile was dark with satisfaction. Russo is finding that his business interests in this city are suddenly facing significant obstacles. Property transfers delayed, permits denied, financial partners mysteriously withdrawing. Turns out when you help bring down a corrupt councilman, you make some powerful friends in City Hall. Mara leaned into his side, feeling his arm come around her waist. "You're bankrupting him. I'm ensuring he never profits from Cole's crimes. There's a difference, is there?" "Yes, because unlike Cole, Russo will walk away with his life and his freedom. He just won't walk away with anything else." Dante's hand traced lazy circles on her hip. "Consider it my version of justice, cold, thorough, and permanent. My dangerous man," Mara murmured, tilting her face up to his. "Your only man," he corrected, before claiming her mouth in a kiss that tasted of wine and promises kept. They made love as the city lights flickered to life below them, slower this time, tender in a way their earlier desperation had never allowed. Dante worshipped her with his hands and his voice. Words of devotion she didn't need translated to understand. And when Mara finally cried out his name, it was with the absolute certainty that this fierce, dangerous, unbreakable thing between them was worth every battle they had fought to claim it. Afterward, wrapped in a blanket and each other, Dante pulled something from the pocket of his discarded jacket. "I have something for you," he said. It wasn't a ring, it was a key, old brass, heavy with history and significance. Attached to it was a small metal plate engraved with an address she didn't recognize. "What is this?" "Your father's original property in Pilsen," Dante said quietly. Cole seized it. "Russo held it through a shell company. I bought it back. The artist studios your father built are still there, protected as historical structures. I had them restored to his original vision." Mara stared at the key, her vision blurring with fresh tears. How, carefully, expensively, completely worth it. He closed her fingers around it. "It's yours, Mara. Do whatever you want with it. Keep it, sell it, turn it into a memorial. But your father's work isn't lost anymore. It's been reclaimed." She couldn't speak, could only press herself against his chest and let him hold her while she wept for the father she had lost, and for the legacy that had been given back. When she finally found her voice, it was rough but steady. "I want to turn it into a legal clinic," she said. "Free representation for people fighting fraudulent land seizures. We'll call it the Kennedy Justice Project." Dante's arms tightened around her. "Then that's what we'll do. I'll fund it, you'll run it. And together we'll make sure no one else loses everything the way your father did." "Together," Mara echoed. And the word felt like a vow. 6 months after that groundbreaking ceremony, Mara stood in what had once been her father's studio space, now transformed into a clean, modern legal clinic with exposed brick walls and warm lighting. The plaque beside the door read, "Kennedy Justice Project, Legal Advocacy for Property Rights." She had just finished her first successful case, helping an elderly couple fight an attempted fraudulent seizure using tactics eerily similar to Cole's methods. The couple had wept with gratitude, their home saved, their dignity restored. This, Mara realized, was what winning actually looked like. Not the courtroom triumph or the media vindication. This, the quiet moment when someone who had been powerless got their power back. Her phone buzzed. Dante's message was short and simple. "Dinner at home, celebrating you, always celebrating you." She smiled, gathered her briefcase, and locked up the clinic. The autumn evening was cool and crisp as she walked to where Marco waited with the car. Because some things didn't change. Dante's protection was absolute and permanent, but everything else had changed. She was no longer invisible, no longer hiding. She was Mara, Chief Legal Counsel and Director of the Kennedy Justice Project. She was a woman who had survived her own destruction and used the broken pieces to rebuild something better. She was dangerous in all the right ways. And tonight she would go home to the man who had helped her become this version of herself. The one with the ruthless exterior and the tender heart underneath, who showed his love through protection and sacrifice, and the absolute refusal to let her be anything less than exactly who she was meant to be. The penthouse smelled of good food and candles when she arrived. Dante stood at the windows, silhouetted against the city he controlled, holding a glass of wine, radiating that controlled power that still made her pulse quicken after everything they had been through. He turned when she came in, and his smile was soft and fierce at the same time. "There's my brilliant lawyer. There's my dangerous man," she replied, crossing to him and sliding into his arms like she had been made to fit there. They kissed slowly, deeply, tasting each other and the life they had built together from ash and fury. When they broke apart, Dante produced a small velvet box that made Mara's heart stop entirely. "Before you panic," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "this isn't a proposal, not yet, not until you're ready, but I want you to have this." He opened the box. Inside, nestled in silk, was a ring, but not an engagement ring. It was her father's wedding band, restored and polished until it gleamed. "I found it in the property inventory from the settlement," Dante explained. "Your mother sold it along with everything else. I bought it back, it's yours, a piece of him that can never be taken away again." Mara's tears fell freely now. Beyond her control, she took the ring with shaking hands and slipped it onto her right hand, feeling the weight of it like her father's blessing. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for choosing me, for loving me enough to fight beside me instead of just fighting for me." Dante cupped her face in both hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You saved me too. The moment you spoke up in that dining room, you saved me from becoming the monster I was afraid I had already become. You gave me a real chance at redemption. Not the hollow kind I was building alone, but the kind that comes from actually being worthy of someone extraordinary. You were already worthy," Mara said fiercely. "You just needed someone to see it. Then we saved each other." He kissed her forehead, her temples, the corners of her mouth. "And we're going to keep saving each other every single day for the rest of our lives, because that's what love is when it's real, not safety or ease. Two people who refuse to let each other face the darkness alone." "Yes," Mara agreed. And then, because she had learned to be brave in all the ways that truly mattered, she said one more thing. "And someday when you do propose, I'll say yes to that too, because you're right. We're permanent, absolute, no going back." His smile was devastating. "I'm holding you to that." They ate dinner overlooking the city that had tried to destroy them and had instead forged them into something completely unbreakable. They made love slowly afterward, taking their time, worshipping each other with hands and mouths and whispered promises. And when they finally fell asleep, tangled together, it was with the peace that comes from knowing that justice had been served, love had been earned, and the future, their future, was entirely theirs to build however they wanted. Her father's legacy lived on in the community center that bore his name, in the legal clinic that fought in his honor, and in the fierce heart of his daughter, who had refused to let his death be meaningless. Richard Cole sat in a federal prison, his empire dismantled, his name synonymous with corruption. And Mara, once invisible, once broken, once powerless, stood beside the most dangerous man in the city as his equal, his partner, his perfectly matched piece. The girl, who had hidden behind a server's uniform, had become a woman who commanded respect with her brilliance and her courage. The waitress who had whispered, "Excuse me, sir, but that clause is a trap," had transformed into a force of nature that made powerful men tremble. And the daughter who had watched her father die had given him back his honor and built a legacy that would protect others from the same fate forever. This was victory, real, messy, hard, one and absolutely permanent, and it was theirs.